Good morning, everybody. To be mindful of everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kelly Ogden Schutte, and my co-host here is Dr. John Marcotte, and we are with Data Sharing for Demographic Research here at ICPSR. And we got to meet Winnie at iAssist, which was wonderful, and she asked us to speak about our poster and a bit more about the concepts behind it. And so, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Marcotte.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. I'd be remiss to not say in various languages, hola, bonjour, bonsoir, to everyone. Today we're going to be talking about reimagining catalogs and repositories to enhance the fairness of data. This grew out of our poster at ISIS, as Kelly said, and this will be sort of an enhanced or more background about it. We certainly will make the slides available to people if people would like that as well. So today I'm going to be covering 6 topics. I'm going to tell you a little bit about DSDR and data sharing for demographic research, um, a little bit of archives and catalogs and repositories, about silos, about metadata, some of the benefits of this, and some of the challenges we face. First thing is data sharing for demographic research. What is that? DSDR is a population health data archive. We're funded here in the United States by the Population Dynamics branch of the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And we're hosted by ICPSR at the University of Michigan. Here's the DSDR team. I, of course, am John Marcotte. You just met Kelly. The other key person is Sarah, who's on vacation, but she nevertheless contributed to this presentation and was at iAssist for the poster presentation. So she's definitely part of the team and definitely made valuable contributions here. So the first thing people ask me about DSDR is what is population health data? Um, Population health data is data that have strong external validity and generalizability. That is, that it's a sample that you can infer to populations. Um, they particularly we have data about health and the impact of factors that may have effect on health. And that's broadly speaking. It can be everything from family structure to barriers to health to how different groups are able to access health. Another buzzword that I sort of throw out here is research data. And this is sort of my little circumstance, but research data for conducting scientific inquiry for the calculation of summary results, of making some inference about a group or a population. Generally speaking, the type of data we have, it's not for doing locating a particular individual. In fact, that's explicitly forbidden for the data. But research data is the ability to make sort of generalizations about things, to be able to find patterns in data. So DSDR is a platform for the discovery, access, and sharing of research data, population health. We view ourselves as more than about data. We're a locus of information for about a lot of different information. So if you come to the DSDR website, you'll find not just about data, but you'll also find information about different aspects to help people, about how to make data management sharing plans, how to remediate disclosure risk. So there's a lot of other resources there besides just data. And last year we turned 20 years old. We're 21 years this year, but we've been around a while, and we feel spry for being old, or depending on how you think of 20, is whether 20 is old or young. But in archive terms, 20 is a little bit on the older side. So our bywords are discover, access, and share. And what do we mean by that? So when we discover, we have data related to obviously maternal and child health, health disparities, families, And of course, we have a lot of data on cross-national comparisons. That's a very important aspect of our is being able to get international data so that scholars can be able to do comparisons and be able to analyze particular countries. Access. We provide the ability to download public research data. We have some online analysis capabilities for people to be able to explore data and look at data. And one of our niches is restricted data. One of the things that happens now with data is becoming more rich and more valuable, but it also means that we can no longer make it public because of the necessary risk. But we have a growing niche and restricted data to make sure that people can still have access to the data. And I want to make sure that people understand that is that when people share data, it doesn't necessarily have to be public data or open access data. It can be restricted or controlled depending on the needs of the data. We're a place, of course, where you can deposit data. Um, you can, if you deposit data with us, you can meet the NIH data sharing requirements. I should say that we also meet general data sharing requirements as well. And also, we maintain the provenance of the data. Data is very important to understand the history and how the data were collected. Provenance includes things like how were the data consented? How were the changes made to the data? And our last thing that is particularly important right now is, and this is ICPSR has a strong commitment to preservation. We've been around, ICPSR has been around for over 60 years, even longer than DSDR. And we have a strong commitment to preserving data for the future. And this is important for future researchers because often you can only understand the current situation by being able to look at what happened previously. And so we have a wonderful archive of data that we are just maintaining. So we have for sharing, we have four deposit options. And the four deposit options, we have a standard data deposit, which is that you deposit the data exclusively with us and we're the exclusive provider of it. In circumstances like that, we can provide the most um, value to the data. We can handle restricted data and do other things. But we've also found that we need to provide some other possibilities. And some of these really key into the whole topic of today. There's what we call a mirror deposit. And what a mirror deposit is the same data and documentation are available from multiple archives with one authoritative source. Typically, this is only public or open access data. But what's important about a mirror deposit is that we can mirror with potentially an archive on another continent. This helps us reach international researchers who speak different languages because as much as I love ICPSR, ICPSR is in the United States. It is an English language archive. There are other archives that are in different languages that are closer to people. The data don't have to be different, but how they access can be closer. So this is really important in terms of being able to reach international researchers. We also, when people can't give us data, we ask for metadata. And metadata is very important. So we get variable metadata, which is kind of like the contents of the data. In the case of survey data, it's actually a description of the variables. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to let people search for variables within our variable search compound, even if we don't host the data. And if you don't have variable metadata, you can give us study metadata, which is a description of the study, which allows us to explore. Now, later on, you'll see the importance of metadata and why it is we push such an emphasis on it. As I said, DSDR has been around for over 20 years. We have over 1,000 studies. We have 170 plus with metadata. We, in our variables database, which I was talking about, which is important, where you're able to search for variables, not just for data, we have over 1.5 million variables that you can search for. So, for instance, if you wanted to look for a study about the relationship between water supply and health, you could search for what studies have variables on water and what had variables on health, not just the description in the study. And something else that we're particularly proud of is our bibliography. Have over 47,000 data-related publications. This is incredibly valuable because it lets you know what's been written about a particular study. We believe that science builds on science. The ability to look at data requires that you know what people did previously. So our data-related publications is an incredibly valuable service, and it's more than just data. And kudos to our librarians who put together this bibliography. Here's a snapshot of the DSDR website. It's really designed to be like a library for you to go and just go around and explore, find out what we have. Look at our data. We want you to come. That's what we do. Please come to the website. The website address is on all the slides. It's just dsdr.icpsr.umich.edu. It's very easy to remember. It's just DSDR, our parent organization, ICPSR, our parent organization, the University of Michigan, EDU. Put that in your web browser and you'll be taken to us. So come in, come look around, look for the data, download the data, explore the data, ask a question, write papers, write proposals. All right, thanks for listening a little bit about DSDR. Now we're going to jump over to getting into the more nitty-gritty of the topic today. And the first section of this is what I call archives, catalogs, and repositories. Now, the language here is a little bit, sometimes people use archives and repositories interchangeably. I'm going to make a distinction here just for the purpose of trying to show different purposes. If you use the language a little differently than I do, that's fine. It's the concepts I'm trying to get at, that there's this notion that an archive has a catalog, but there's also the repository. It's like in a library. In the old days, there was a card catalog, and then there were the books on the shelves. Okay? Um, our data is like the books on the shelves. We obviously don't have shelves, everything is digital, but we have a catalog and repositories. And for the most part, these catalogs and repositories have been tightly bound together, kind of working individually to each other. And the research data archives typically focus on a particular domain area or topic area. For instance, ICPSR is primarily about survey data, although we have a lot of other data as well now. They often have specialized metadata schemes. They maintain a tight integration between the catalog and the repository. That has some advantages because there's certain things you can do if you know about your collection, not collection, but it also has some disadvantages. So, as we here at the beginning, was an archive should adhere to the FAIR principles. Okay, and the FAIR principles are, of course, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But I've annotated these words a little bit with two other words that I want to point out to you. One is that a popular word now isn't just findable, is discoverable. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between findable and discoverable. And also, rather than just reusable, we talk about reanalyzable because at ICPSR and DSDR, we're not just trying to make data available for people to get. We're trying to make it so that people can actually analyze the data. So that means reanalyzable data has to have good documentation, has to have variable labels. It has to have value labels so that researchers can actually analyze the data. And this is very important. So it's almost like I'm taking it to a higher standard, not just reusable, but reanalyzable. So one of the things that people are very interested in is findability. And a lot of times people now talk about discoverability. And discoverability is what I kind of like to call enhanced findability. It's the ability to search for data. It's the ability to explore for data. It's listings in multiple catalogs, not just one catalog. Findable could be thought of as, well, you've got a digital object on an identifier. So there's a persistent identifier, so the data are findable. But that doesn't necessarily it allowed people to discover the data, to actually find it in context, to go and search for variables or search for topics. Discoverability depends a lot on common metadata elements. So, as I alluded to earlier, metadata, shared metadata is the key to discovery. And this whole notion that we're talking about really depends on metadata and the sharing of metadata. So interoperability, this is the I that in FAIR, a lot of people know what access means and people know what reusable is, but interoperability is something that is particularly important because that's what allows catalogs to communicate with each other. That's what allows repositories to communicate with each other. So we have common metadata elements, common data formats, common documentation formats. These are things, by the way, the common document is something that ICPSR excels at. But there's something else that's important here that is a growing need, which is API, an application programming interface. And APIs are a necessary tool for operationalizing interoperability. It is the key to how catalogs can communicate with each other. So it's important not only for ICPSR for catalogs for us to be able to reference other catalogs of data we don't host, but it's important for other catalogs to be able to reference data that we host, because that's how you make it as discoverable as possible. And that's very important. Okay. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about archive silos. And I love this little graph that was put together by our graphics department. A shout out to Jenna Tyson, who is our wonderful graphic artist here, who made this nice graphic representing how archives are typically that there's a data catalog in a repository, data catalog, and they don't really talk to each other. They're siloed together. What they do really well, but they don't talk to each other. So fact of the matter is, most research data archives are silos. They're not set up to do any kind of the sharing or interoperability. In principle, they can, but they don't really do it. So data holdings are listed in the same catalog as the repository. We don't really have a sense of a shared catalog. They're for different metadata schemes. Some use DDI, some use Dublin Core, some use their own custom metadata schemes. There's low discoverability, and discoverability is really key. Low interoperability. And there's an impediment to linkages, to being able to combine data from different sources. Because now we live in a world where people want to be able to use information, analyze information from different sources. Um, Archive silos are, first of all, they're how repositories developed. Most repositories started and grew independently. There wasn't a consortium, although ICPSR is a consortium, we didn't have a consortium with other archives. And the silos were easier to implement because they only had to handle internal information. So if you're trying to develop a data archive and you only have to worry about your internal parameters, it's a lot easier to work that way. So the silos were easier to implement, but that was an old model in terms of development. We need to think to the future where we have more than silos. We have researchers on different continents. We have researchers in different disciplines. We have data from different sources. So archive silos no longer reflect the research landscape. And there are two pieces to this. It's more than two, but two to keep in mind here is one, that researchers often want to combine data from different sources. A good example of that is they want to combine survey data with environmental data. They want to combine survey data with policy level data. So the other thing is that projects are now collecting different types of data. A lot of our data collections now with survey data, some of our major collections, are also collecting biomarker data. They're collecting genomics data. And these often require specialized archives to be able to preserve and maintain the provenance of these data. So even in a single study, you may have things that are of different types. So where are we going with this? Well, shared metadata. I know I sound like a broken record, but shared metadata. So while archives can host their specialized and particular domain or topic data, but they still need to share metadata with other archives and make that data discoverable. It facilitates research, maintains the provenance. Provenance is very important. It maintains controls and restrictions, and it promotes linkages, people being able to look at data in different ways. Metadata, metadata, metadata. So what's the vision? This is what the whole poster was about at iAssist. And the vision is that catalogs are able to pull metadata from multiple repositories, and repositories can export their metadata to multiple catalogs. So we have a two-way communication here. Notice now that in this nice graphic again, is that instead of having silos, we have a catalog that can communicate with different types of data archives. This is really vital to the future that we're going to. So we would still have different types of repositories. The repositories would still handle their specialized types of data, but the catalogs would be able to pull metadata from multiple repositories. And the vision is that the catalog would no longer be tied to a single repository. While you primarily could pull from your own repository, you would also have the ability to pull from other repositories. It's like what we have now with university libraries. Go to a university library, you can go to a university library, and they will often have references to collections at other universities and other public institutions. So it's not just your job to tell you what you have. It's also the ability to tell people about what the landscape is out there in general. So just to keep in mind, here's some notion of what some different types of repositories that people might be having. And there are more than this. These are just some examples. Obviously, surveys, administrative records. Now, a lot of administrators will, how is that different than surveys? Sometimes administrative records have some different requirements. They have some different metadata. Geospatial. This is very important. People want to know about information about an area. How does the situation in an area affect individuals? Genomics. Raw genomic scores are huge and require extra processing power. Then you get derived genomic scores. How does that work? Biomarkers. There certainly are the derived biomarkers, which are then digitized, but the original biomarkers often require refrigeration, require special preservation. Qualitative data. This is a big area for us where people want to have the richness of having in-depth interviews, but how does that relate to these others? How does the metadata scheme? Neuroimages and videos and images. Now we're getting circumstance where people do record some interviews with people. It's a kind of an enhanced qualitative, but people want to be able to use videos and images. And that's just an example of the different things. So, what are the benefits of sharing metadata? Um, as we've said, discoverability, interoperability, linkages, awareness. This is a key thing, awareness of different data that are available. And with that awareness becomes new analysis possibilities. You don't want to live something in a vacuum. We want people to analyze data. We think data analysis is wonderful. We think that it enhances science, it advances public policy, it enhances public health. So we want people to be able to analyze data. So our goal is to try and make the data as discoverable as possible. So Keep in mind that studies, as I was saying before, they collect different types of data, potential linkages. And as I said before, researchers on different continents do not all speak the same language. While the data can be the same, it's nice to be able to expose the data, so that it's more accessible to researchers in different parts of the world. Whether it's we have data at DSDR from Asia, from Africa, from South America, from East Asia. It's nice if we can also make that data available through archives on those continents that are necessarily more accessible as well, or at least expose them and so that people know about the data to come to DSDR. So who benefits? Um, we think researchers benefit. Um, Data stewards definitely benefit. Um, Data librarians and archivists who are trying to provide data to researchers, they're going to benefit because they're going to be able to say, I may not have the data, but the data are available here. Or here are some data sets you combine together. And the last thing who benefits is science. Science benefits, public health benefits, public policy benefits. So here's some examples. We have a lot of times what people want to do is they want to combine biomarkers and genomics with survey or administrative data. This is sometimes called in the genomics literature G by E, which is they want to look at genomics by environment. How do the two of those interact together? We know that things are not as clear cut. There is a real interaction between the genetic component and the environment. They want to combine neuroimages with survey data, link variables from different sources, and of course, link variables at a geographic level. This is a big area for us where people want to be able to link in environmental information at the county level. They want to be able to link in or at a tract level or whatever level, at a country level or at a state level, depending on your perspective, where you're able to link in information about the geographic area. So I'd like to say that this was easy, and so that's why I end here with challenges. And this is kind of a call to action. But it's always people always say, well, you should just share your data. Well, sharing is not as straightforward as we like to say. Oh, just share your data. Um, there's a different metadata scheme. Um, how do these map together? Um, we need an API to pull metadata from different repositories. This is really important, and it's really valuable that people commit to this. So I just mentioned metadata schema. This is just an example of a few metadata schema, and there are many more. Um, Dublin Core is a very popular metadata scheme. There's DDI, Data and Documentation Initiative C, which is Codebook, which is the primary um, metadata schema that ICPSR uses. There's also DDIL, which is for lifecycle, which is for longitudinal data. This is a growing for us because we have more and more data that have longitudinal. There's Darwin Core for biological data. There's ISO 19115 for geographic data. There's NISO for mix in images, and there's many, many more. It's metadata is the scheme. So it's getting a room full of people getting to agree on the metadata is important. So what do we need here? So along that line, we have metadata. Just to give you some examples of specialized archives, we have dbGaP, which is the National Institute's biomarker repository. Collectica, which is run by a small entrepreneurial group here in the United States that focuses on DDI lifecycle, really focused on longitudinal data. Figshare, which is a place where people often put their data for sharing, but Figshare doesn't do anything about discoverability. It's a nice place to park your data. Dataverse, another great repository. But again, we're interested not just that you can put stuff in Dataverse, but how is it we communicate? The Data and Specimen Hub, also funded by NIH, they have their own metadata schema. And the qualitative data archive primarily run out of Syracuse, but there are also work being done at Washington in St. Louis, where people want to particularly put in qualitative data. So what do we need? And now we really come to the key thing, what I call the metadata translator. Okay. And this is then is really important. And as I look at this, there's a real potential for AI here because a lot of the metadata translation requires mapping fields to fields, mapping, looking for patterns, looking for language. So real important to have some natural language processing, the ability to map fields together. How do you deal with fields without correspondence? What are we dealing with different types of metadata? In our world, we refer to sort of study metadata, which is a description of the study. And that could be for any type of study, whether it's survey data, whether it's data collected on biomarkers or whatever. It generally is a larger thing. But then we have variable metadata, what I will call the data to sort of get an inside the the actual study. We're able to dig deeper inside, find out what's actually in the data in terms of discovery. In survey data, this is variable level metadata. In neuroimages, this may be particular points that you're trying to particularly identify. So this notion of data is really important in terms of how metadata translator goes. I think right now we're poised with the advances in technology to have a good metadata translator. Some of you may be familiar with Stat Transfer. Stat Transfer is a wonderful tool, and what it does is that it allows you to take data from one, say it's in SAS format, translate it to SPSS or Stata or R. Okay, that's what I'm envisioning for the metadata translator. Metadata transfer, where we would have some ability to map and work things and expose. Obviously, you're not going to have a perfect mapping one-to-one. The specialized repositories will still have some niches about this, but there's a lot we can expose in common catalogs. So the other thing that's needed to do this is the ability, it's easy to pull metadata from a single study. But now if we're talking about pulling metadata from lots of studies, we really need a programming interface, the ability for a catalogs to talk to each other. That's really what an API does. It allows catalogs to talk to one catalog and another. So each repository would need to have an API for their metadata schema. Or, as I like to encourage people, or store the metadata in a schema with an API. But this is really important in terms of being like it. Each catalog would need to be able to implement multiple API. You would need to be able to both export your catalog and be able to import as well. And this requires investment by everyone, understanding, breaking down these silos, understanding the importance that these common catalogs can have, that our missions now extends beyond to just saying, what is it we have in our repository, but what's the data landscape in general? Or as I like to refer to it as, NIH likes people to come to visit us, and not necessarily for us to tell us just about data, but for us to tell them about data that's available throughout other repositories. And that's a larger mission than just saying, here's what we have and how do we communicate. So I encourage you to connect with us. We have a phone number. Yeah, you certainly can call us internationally. We like it better when you send us email. That's our email address. Subscribe to our news. We're also on social media. We have a Linktree address. If you scan the QR code, if you're able to do that, that will take you to our Linktree. and it'll show you that we are, of course, on X or Twitter. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Facebook. Our goal with social media is to reach where you are. It's not a comment on the value of social media. We're trying to communicate with researchers. So I want to thank you, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you, John. We do have one question already in the Q&A. If anyone else has any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We have a question that asks, at what level should data deposit for sharing be made? So I think this is a question referring to your data deposit slide. If you want to speak to that.
Oh, okay, so I thank you. It was a wonderful question. So one of the reasons we have the options for the data is because we want people to share their data. We can offer the most if they give us a standard deposit. We can do the most with the data. But if they're unable to provide a standard deposit, we offer other options. So it depends on the data. If the data have restrictions or controls, a standard deposit's important. If you have data on different time, you're trying to communicate with researchers in different continents and different languages, perhaps a mirror might work. The important thing about a mirror is determining who's the authoritative source. I don't like having different types of, excuse me, different versions of data. I think that there needs to be an authoritative source. But if you're in a circumstance where you can't give us the data because you're an ongoing study or there's restrictions, metadata allows us to let people know about the data. They still would have to come to a particular repository to get the data, but it'd be able to get to us. So it really depends on your particular circumstance and what you're able to share. As I say, if you give us a standard deposit, we're able to do the most for you. However, our goal isn't just to do the most, it's also to enhance the discoverability of data.
Thank you, John. There's a follow-up to that, which is the question about should the data already be structured with one of the four deposit options you've mentioned. And I think sort of it's not in the question, but I believe sort of the follow-up to that would be, or can we kind of guide people through
We can
options?
certainly guide people through. They're not mutually exclusive in that sense in terms of the structure. The metadata is a piece of, so if you did a standard deposit, you're actually giving us the variable level metadata and the study level metadata. It's all one package. It's the idea is that you could separate them in terms of what you're able to give to us. We want to be able to provide as much exposure to data as possible. So we can give the maximum exposure with a standard deposit, but we don't stop there. If we can't expose it with a standard deposit, give us a description of your study. Um, all of these should be one thing. The repository where the data are stored should actually have all three of these things. It should have the standard deposit, the variable level data, and metadata. But other repositories that don't host the data could have the metadata to enhance the discoverability. Other questions?
I'm not seeing any. Oh, Dr. Casito, did you want to, since you have the ability
Uh,
to speak, did you want to just ask aloud?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Uh, Given the various types of data that we have, is it is there something possible that we can have metadata which can link to each other uh, even when their structure is not the same?
Well, that's the
Uh,
importance of the metadata translator in terms of being able at the very minimum, we can have a what I would call sort of global or study level metadata, which allows us to expose things. Where it gets to be more difficult is when you start to try and describe in more detail the actual internal contents of the data. which in survey data we call variable level metadata, but in other types of data, you have different types of contents. But at the very least, we can have study level metadata where even if the study has different type of data, we can make that a field and examine that. So we can say at ICPSR, these data are available at this location, and here's the type of data it is.
Oh, thank you.
But that I can't, the whole notion of trying to have common metadata is there are going to be things that don't necessarily translate. And it's not an effort to destroy repositories that have specialized things. The idea here is that let's keep those repositories, but let's expose their data in more places. And I'll give you an example that one particular of interest is environmental data, where people want to know about the environmental situation. That's collected often in very different ways than survey data. How did that get combined? How are people aware of that kind of environmental data? Because researchers can only analyze what they're aware of. And part of, I view as librarians, archivists, researchers, part of our job is, at least part of my job, is to make people aware of different types of data that are available for analysis.
John, we have another question, which is how do library management systems like Koha come into play in data sharing and archival?
Um, it's the same issue in terms of how it is that they communicate with other library systems. Um, the library systems are generally catalogs. Um, it's how does the catalog communicate with with others? I'd like to see libraries could be a circumstance where we could catalog data in a library. The data itself wouldn't necessarily be available at the library, but it's certainly for researchers, students, professors looking to analyze data. The library could be their first source of things, where they actually go to the catalog in the library. Tell me what's available on this topic. And not only here's the literature, books on this, but here's data that could be available on this topic. And here's where you go for it.
I answered a couple of questions in the Q&A. Mostly about if you have sort of more specific questions, please do email us at dsdr-data@umich.edu. And there was a question about how to cite data, or is it possible to cite data that's made available? And I did answer that about that all data receives a direct object identifier, which helps with citations. And that also gave an example of one of our study pages and how we put an example citation at the top of the study page, which, provides guidance to researchers who are using the data. And we also, of course, when we're working with uh, researchers or people who've applied for the data, guide them to that citation with guidance to use it whenever they're doing publications or presentations. So those answers are also in the Q&A. I am not seeing any other questions. Does anyone else have any questions at this time?
Well, thank you. And I do want to say is that this is a cooperative notion. It's not trying to undermine a repository. A lot of times we have data. If I've done in my career, done a lot of international work. There are often restrictions in terms of being able to access data from other countries. Um, our goal here is to be able to expose and make people aware of. If you need to apply for data, you would still need to apply for access, but you can't apply if you're not aware of what the data is. And this is really vital in the sense of you still need to have research plans, you still need to have permissions for the data, but we want people to be aware of what's available. Again, because people don't analyze, and in particular, this is important for students who, when they're looking for data to do master's theses or dissertations. They are often looking for data. How do they discover that data? And I'd love it if you went to a library catalog and I looked up data on water supply and health in Africa. I would love if it not only came up with the literature, but it also said in addition that there are these data sources that are also available for you to be able to analyze, to go and look at this.
Thank you so much for coming to our webinar, and we and we put the link in the chat, and I can put it there again for the poster and the abstract. There it is again if you need it. And please do reach out. We're more than happy to continue the conversation and to answer any additional questions that may occur to you after you think about the topic a bit more, or as you continue in your work. Um, and we were delighted to spend this time with you. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope you have a blessed day. Goodbye.